Each piece of the puzzle begins to fit neatly into place, creating a breathtaking picture of love, compassion, courage, and grace. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Thank you. And on to our land acknowledgement. Just give us a moment. Thanks so much, Andrea. So moving on to item 1.2, which is the approval of the agenda. We're just getting it up on the screen there. You all would have received this in your package for tonight's meeting. So I just need a motion to move the agenda. Rhonda, thank you. Can I get someone to second that? Thank you. Okay, moving on to item number 2, declarations of conflict of interest. Do we have any declarations of conflict of interest this evening? Okay, seeing none, we move into our presentations. We have a few presentations this evening. So I'm going to start with our first one. Item number 3.1 is our multi-year strategic plan consultation. And thank you everyone for joining us a little bit earlier tonight so that we could accommodate this. Josh Fullen is the founder and executive director of Maximum City, and Priya Pinjani is the project facilitator from Maximum City. They are here to have a discussion on the multi-year strategic plan and get feedback from SEAC. So welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for sharing your meeting with us this evening. My job for the next sort of hour and a bit is to ask you a few really good questions and then to sit back and listen. We have a short presentation on what the strategic plan is, where it points the board in terms of ongoing improvement. And then I'll take any questions and we'll get into sort of a tabletop activity that you can do in pairs. So I am just going to transition to the slideshow. Is there a secret? Oh, there we go. It's a little bit of delay. Is there a secret to advancing the slides on this? Oh. That was foolish of me. I was pressing the button here, expecting it to advance. Okay. All right. Well, let's not celebrate my mistake. Thank you. So here's our agenda. We'll do a little bit of introduction into the MYSP, the group discussion, and then I'll share some next steps. Next slide, please. There, that worked. Next slide again, please. So for those of you who are not so familiar with strategic plans, you can think of it as a compass. It's a very important compass because it's invested with a lot of moral purpose. It really points the board towards ongoing improvement across the learning organization. It's a very powerful compass, as I said. It provides clarity, it provides meaning, and it asks really big questions. So big picture, aspirational thinking questions. What do you want your schools to be? What do you want for students who enter your schools? So the plan has to be student-centered. What brought staff to the work of education? What will keep them there? What will give them purpose and meaning in their work? And how can the HCDSB build confidence in families and in the public? Those are sort of the big questions. We will ask you versions of those questions in that placemat activity shortly, but that's really what we're tackling in the plan. So they're important questions. Next slide, please. To give you a sense of where we are coming from, this is what the current plan looks like. So the term of the current plan ends this year. It was extended during the pandemic. The mission and the vision were put out to community a couple of years ago and were revised. So those are closed items. You have copies, or you will have copies of the current plan in front of you shortly. Next slide, please. And those are the values currently in the plan, driven by those three anchors: achieving, believing, and belonging. In a typical exercise like this, the values don't change tremendously. They tend to be kind of eternal things for a board, but how you pursue those values, how you prioritize those values, certainly can change from plan to plan. Next slide, please. And I know this is a hard one to read, but it essentially shows the current strategic priorities. So where the board is headed in terms of ongoing improvement in those categories, in those pillars of achieving, believing, belonging. And you'll see a fourth one there in the gray box, which is foundational elements. The purpose of tonight is not to do a granular review of the current plan. It's to look ahead. So I only show you this to sort of foreground our conversation and where we're coming from. The work tonight, though, is about looking ahead, about towards challenges, priorities, and how to support different stakeholder groups in the district towards ongoing improvement. Next slide, please. This is the typical phasing that we've adopted from sort of ministry guidelines, I would say. These primarily come from, so phase one was completed before we came on board. We're currently in phase two, which is consulting and gathering information from as many folks as we can. So if you think of that opening prayer and the pieces of the puzzle all fitting together, each group we speak to is a piece of the puzzle, or maybe a pixel in a picture is a better metaphor. And the more pixels we can collect, the clearer the picture becomes. So the more folks we talk to, the more groups, the more committees, the more lived experience we can put into the funnel, the stronger the plan becomes at the end, because it becomes informed by authentic priorities. It becomes imbued with real lived experience, and it affirms those shared values that are in the current plan. In the fall, we will do some synthesis and development of the new plan in terms of new strategic priorities. It will go to board at the end of the year, and then it will begin being implemented in 2024. The typical term for a plan is 4 years. Your current one is 5. So if something extraordinary happens during a 4-year term, you can certainly extend it. The minimum is 3 years, but it's really it's not up to us as facilitators to determine the length of the plan. That's a decision for the folks who are leading it on the district side. Next slide. Before we get into the discussion component, I'm just going to pause for a moment and see if there are any questions about the fundamentals of the plan or how we're gathering the information.
Does anybody have any questions, clarification, anything? Nope, you're doing a great job, Josh.
Thank you. Once I figured out how to advance the slides, I think I did pretty well, right? So thanks very much for that. Yes, right. Okay. So the first sort of resource that we've Pri and I have passed around is this gray primer. You don't need to read the front because I just sort of walked you through it. But on the back are two really good kind of thought starter questions, and they're really sort of low barrier questions. What's working well for you now as fill in your role? So I understand that most folks here are their parents or representatives of organizations, or maybe a little bit of both. So you would circle that or identify that. And then what could be improved as a fill in the stakeholder role as part of your experience in the HCDSB. So it's what's working well, because we want to pull out kind of the success and the strengths, because we know good things are happening out there. And then sort of what can be improved. And we'll do a little bit of a share. And this is a really quick one. It's like 10 minutes. And then the meat of the activity is this larger placemat. And I'll introduce that in a moment. And this gets into some more specific questions that dig deeper on sort of those the thought starters. If you can do this with another person, that's great. So I encourage you to sort of consolidate around a single sheet if you are 2 or 3 people, and just have one note taker take your notes. This is anonymous. We don't want names. We don't want you identifying names of staff or people or even schools. We want sort of high level feedback so that we can feed it into the process. Any questions about this first one? Can I give you 10 minutes, and Pri and I will walk around and sort of prod you if there are any. But please get together with a partner if you can. And we have pens and sticky notes as well. that we hear from each other for a moment. An important part of this process is not just the writing down, not just asking the questions, it's actually hearing each other so that you hear what other folks are talking about, that there is sort of a living record of it, and that we also hear you say it. It's different to hear someone say it than to read it. Having said that, if you want something included in the process, make sure you write it down. Let's take a moment to hear each other. So just if you could share one thing from each of the questions. I know some folks went out of order, and that's fine. We can hear from them as well. There's no rules here. It's you can subvert the process as much as you like, as long as you answer some of the questions. So if we could hear from folks, and just if you could state your role and one thing under each question, and the challenge is not to repeat the same thing. So if somebody else has said what you've written down, try and say something new. And is it fair to start with? No, it's not fair. Okay. Can I look over here? Yes. Okay. Yeah. So what did you write? One thing you wrote, and what's working well and please identify sort of your role.
Sure. So my name is Maria Lorenko, and I'm the alternate rep for ABC Ontario, which is an association that represents gifted children. As of September, I no longer have children in the board, but I have fairly recent experience. And my partner here is well known, Superintendent Stackett. So no pressure on me to have one of the most senior people here with me. In terms of what's working well, opportunity for SEAC members and other committees to participate on board level committees, to have that opportunity beyond just the high level here at SEAC, where we can get into a bit of the details with board staff. And in terms of making our experience better, I think one thing, well, we had sort of two things. So the acknowledgement of feedback that's received. I think a lot of times parents feel that when they give feedback, it's not really acknowledged, or it's not acknowledged in a way that really acknowledges it or addresses it. So that doesn't mean, I want to be really clear that doesn't mean there's an expectation that a parent or a committee member makes a recommendation and the board has to accept it, but to at least respond in a way that clarifies, maybe why it's not being accepted, so that it's really a collaborative experience. We didn't talk about this, I'm throwing this in now, but a lot of times we hear the word collaborative, but it doesn't really feel collaborative. And the other big one is there's a lot of equity work being done right now, which is really important, but sometimes it feels like some groups it's not really equitable, right? So an example, they almost got rid of grade 9 AP math here as a response to streaming. And it's happened, our board's been pretty good, but there's always a bit of anxiety when we see what's happening at other boards, where, for example, TDSB is turning some of their programs, which used to have like admission process, and now it's lottery, right? In the name of equity. So things like that we worry about, that some groups kind of get excluded in the process to be inclusive.
Thank you. Trustee Saunders, could we move over to you if that's okay?
Thank you. The board has many devout staff who are dedicated to education, and they're strong believers in the faith, and they're optimistic about the future. So I've been visiting schools, so I'm really impressed with that. What doesn't work is that, again, many staff in talking were discouraged with the politicization and polarization of the board. So they have mentioned that to me.
Can you repeat the first part of that?
The many staff are discouraged with the politicalization and polarization of the board. So they've mentioned that a few times.
Thank you, Trustee Saunders. If I could move just to this group over here.
I'm Jessica Lynn. Oh, that wasn't me, was it? Okay, I'm the representative of ABC Ontario, and I was working with Andrea and Amanda here. We're going to highlight just one. We felt that the mental health awareness initiatives throughout the school and board is very easily noticeable, and students are very comfortable talking about it, at least in my own experience, my children's sharing of their peers and school Twitter account and everything. One thing that we wished could improve going forward is, again, lived experience from various members of the community as well. The COVID learning gap I know the staff are always trying to close that gap, but we're just so limited in resources. They're trying to catch up, but the foundational learnings that they miss, especially for high school students in the past 2-3 years of the quadmester system, staff hands were tied, but students are also lacking the foundation. And a lot of parents are looking for private tutoring. So that was a bit of a concern for me hearing from the community.
Thank you very much. Trustee Agnew.
Thank you. So we'll do the same. We'll pick one from each area. Rana, do you want to speak to one of those and I can speak to one?
One of the things, so parent, I represent Voice for Deaf and Hard of Hearing Children. And so one of the things that we feel that the board's doing well or is working well is the number of support staff and the ever-growing support staff for our special education students.
And the part that we thought that we could do better with would be from a communication perspective. So knowing that special education is complicated and complex and often highly emotional for families who are involved with special education is just having a clearer, more concise way to communicate in an effective manner with parents. So I feel like that could be done a little bit better.
Thank you very much. Moving over to my left.
Hi, I'm Angela Santos. I am just filling in and a parent tonight, speaking on behalf of caregiver support. And we moved over to the big chart because we thought this macro question was a little bit too much for us. And we just not to piggyback on anyone else's ideas, we did bring up mental health and well-being, and we were talking about accessibility to qualified supports and making sure that, you know, there are enough qualified EAs, speech therapists, CYCs to handle certainly our children's mental health and well-being, but also to normalize and identify symptoms, behaviors, getting kids to feel comfortable in the classroom. You mentioned that, Jessica. But also we thought it would be to help them identify these in the future. We just had said implementing more programming that's accessible for, I would say, at the secondary school level. Elementary, I've got both students, elementary and secondary, and I felt like elementary is a little bit more streamlined, and there's a bit of a disconnect there once you get to the secondary level. I think as ownership is taken from more, there's a third, the student is more involved in the processes of identifying special education needs. So there's, I would just say, making sure that those supports are qualified.
Thank you. And there's a student in every class who subverts your instructions and does the questions out of ours. And I fully support that. As a former teacher, I fully support different pathways are important. Yes.
So Jody and I answered this as staff, and we felt one of the things that was working for us was the professional development for staff by staff. We think we have a really rich network of professionals that, you know, enrich the practice of each other. What would make our experience as staff better? We felt that facilities that had more collaborative spaces or more flexible spaces so that people could work together would enhance our experience.
Thank you. Did we hear from everyone? I believe we did. Okay. So appreciate all of that discussion, and certainly some new things that we haven't heard yet, some things that affirm what we've already heard in other consultations. So I appreciate all of those insights. We are now going to move on to, sorry, could I get the next slide? Can't see. There we go. We're now going to move on to this larger sheet. In this one, you do not need to do in any particular order. They're essentially the same questions. They're a little more specific than the broad ones that you just answered. And one side, the side with the watermark that says students, are student-focused questions. So these are questions about what do you think are going to be priorities for students in the next few years? How can the board support them to achieve those priorities? What do you think are challenges that students will face in the next few years? So we've heard some of them already. And the back are sort of more community focused questions. So thinking of your role, perhaps as a representative of an organization, this would be the place to go if you want to answer from that perspective. And the questions on those sides are how can the HCDSB help parents and caregivers support their children's learning, growth, and well-being? So there's a lot in that question. And if I know learning, growth, and well-being are, those are subjective terms, first of all. And if you want to focus on one and not all three, please, feel free to do that. Just circle it and focus on one. If you want to focus on holistic sort of growth and development and put all three of those in the same bucket, please do that. And then the other question on the back is how can the HCDSB work with community partners, so in this case with the organizations that you represent, to best serve the needs of children and families. The question at the bottom is sort of an exit question. If you have time, it's what advice would you give a new parent or staff member or community partner who is just entering the HCDSB? And that's it. So we'll do the same thing again. We'll spend a little bit longer letting you folks answer either this side or the flip side. We'll do a bit of a share, and then we'll take a final kind of 15 or 20 minutes to do the other questions, and I'll show you some next steps. So are there any questions about that? Not seeing anything. Okay. sharing and listening to each other for a bit. So no prescribed order here. And I'm going to go in a different order. I think that's fair. So we'll start over here. And just if you're going to tell us which question you're sharing about, and we'll just share a couple of things and move on to the next group. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we're going to speak to number 3. How can HCDSB help parents, caregivers support their children's learning, growth, and well-being? And we felt two things actually were really important. One was creating community within schools through social and family events and opportunities for parents to meet one another. So not necessarily speakers, but just those barbecues, the movie nights, all those chances to come together, and also supporting parents, their own mental health and well-being through helping them access community supports.
Thank you. Next group, please.
Yeah, so we're tackling number 4, which is how can the HCDSB work with community partners to best serve the needs of children and families. So we were saying that it's important for them to understand the needs of the different diagnoses that are out there, and that they have completely different challenges, and help teachers have the right tools and to be able to understand the diagnosis and educate themselves. So we were even thinking of having something where there's an online resource where they know the information there's reliable, provided by organizations, for example, that they could tap into if a child's coming into their classroom with a specific diagnosis that they're not familiar with, and then not relying on the parents to be the educators of the diagnosis solely, because often the parents are the advocates, but allowing that teacher to come as the expert themselves and have reliable tools for that. So that was one thing that we thought. And we also said that organizations would be able to provide information directly to the school board that was also reliable about the different diagnoses, and that would also streamline that process.
Thank you. Trustee Ag.
Sure. Okay, so we have, we have one from 1 and one from 2. Is that okay if we speak to those really quickly?
Absolutely.
Okay, so one of the ones that we have from section 1 as far as priorities, and these aren't necessarily, I don't think, new priorities, but they are ongoing significant priorities, which is inclusion and accessibility. And we did hear from our student census information that there is a large percentage of students with disabilities who do not feel a sense of belonging, and they do not feel safe in our schools. And so there was 2 reasons listed for that. And one was education around that, and 2 was accessibility. So I think it continues to be a huge priority that we make our venues and our communities and our schools as accessible as possible, so that all learners can participate to the fullest extent of their abilities. And then the second one we had, as far as anticipating significant challenges for students in the next few years, we had the topic of intersectionality. Speaking about how, if you have someone of a racialized group who is also identified with a disability or specific identification, that there may be different elements at play there that have to be considered. And we're starting to see more of the intersectionality happen. And so, recognizing that the supports may need to be twofold, or they may need to be diverse in their approach because of those multiple components that we may see with some of our students being identified.
Thank you, Trustee. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because I'm a community partner, that's how I function today. I feel under number 4, it's really important to invite community partners to all school transition, like school entry meetings, and encourage those community partners to speak on behalf of the children coming in. That's at that entry level, JK-SK level.
Can you give me a specific example of what you're describing?
Sure, like infant hearing programs. So they work with children from 0 to 6. So at that point of entry, so age 3, 4, there's usually a school entry meeting where parents come, and then school staff convene to learn more about that child. Invite that community partner to be there because they know the child and they can support the families as well. It's a really important piece for me, but encouraging them to participate in the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we move to this group over here?
Sure. Okay, so we're going to speak to number 2, what we anticipate as significant challenges for students in the next few years. And something that we really focused on is the younger students coming into JK and even a lot of like the earlier learnings, but social skills and speech and language skills, I think, are going to be a really big challenge for this new group of kids coming in. A lot of them are COVID babies that saw a lot of people masked, never saw mouths moving. So their speech is definitely delayed. Their social skills are delayed because they were in quarantine and didn't really see a whole lot of people. So I think we were thinking that's probably going to be a big challenge that the schools board can anticipate in the next coming years. And we think that a way that the board could help students meet these challenges is perhaps obviously more funding for services or more service providers, but that's not always possible. But Andrea had a great idea about, building some of these therapies into some of the curriculum. So whether it be, a speech and language pathologist helps a teacher build some curriculum right into their lesson planning that might help all of the students in the classroom, just to kind of get ahead of it.
Thank you very much. As you know from our conversation, that one speaks to me strongly as a parent of kids that age. Thank you. Yeah, Chris. Yeah, we had a really good. Yeah.
Support their children. So, what we thought was they can inform parents of the options, because there's so many options available and the opportunities. Get parents engaged, hold their hands to get the kids going in the right direction and build confidence. And I spoke to, experiences that we've had in our family where special ed kids remain special ed kids even as 58-year-old adults, where, right from grade one, they were told, we're taking you to team. And from that point in the rest of their life, they always saw themselves as different. So what we can do is help to build confidence, that they can carry for their whole life, and work with the parents to make them feel integrated, to make them feel part of the school. Because I've seen it in a couple people in my family where, even to this day, they put limitations on themselves because they still see themselves as these kids who are a little bit behind everyone else and didn't quite understand what was going on. So I think that, the more we get involved, the more we can build confidence and get them going in the right direction. And then the next part was number 4, how can the school board work with community, build strong teams, like have a team approach, focus on confidence, focus on self-esteem, make these community groups part of the school, integrate them, give them opportunities to work with these kids and get them going in the right direction.
Thank you very much. Yes.
I just want to add one thing, because I don't think anybody picked number 5. What advice would you give? And so I just wanted to share my advice for a new parent coming in. Get involved early, because it takes a long time to learn the system and it takes a long time to have impact.
Thank you. There's a lot in what you just said, actually.
I know. I'm trying to keep it brief.
Yeah. Well, it takes a long time to get involved, I think is worth unpacking. Can you just spend a
Sorry,
moment?
it takes a long time. I said take a long time to learn the system.
To learn the sorry,
Yes.
that's what, can you unpack that just a little bit? Because I think
Yeah,
there's probably
absolutely.
something important under there.
Well, absolutely. Like, and even just in terms of spec ed, so just like, again, my experience, like I had a kindergarten teacher tell me, oh, your son's gifted. And I was like, oh, okay. I had no idea until many years later, and really through ABC, that meant an identification, that was part of special education, that meant an IEP. Like I had like this whole big,
Mhm.
right? And even like later on, I was trying to get challenges and like to have them challenged in the classroom. And it was like, well, there's a waiting list and maybe, there's testing later. Like I didn't know what people were talking about, like universal testing. Now I know looking back, right? And this is kind of part of why I come here and play this role here, is to try and navigate things and give feedback on how it can be made easier for parents coming along, because it's taken me a long time to really understand the system.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I know we're tight for time, but I just have a question. Gathering on what Mandy had mentioned, the community partners and everything. The parent guide that our parents get from the spec ed department when they start the process, does it list all of our community partners and associations? Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought that would be a great place to list it, and that one common place every parent can be directed to, right? And that the associations can really help them cut that learning time.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone for sharing your experiences and your insights. I still have a few minutes. Do I not? I do. Okay. Okay. Yes. No, I appreciate the motivation. So, so we have a few minutes just to show our last slides about next steps. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. We don't need the slide. We can go. Yeah, we can go past this one too. Keep going and keep going, please. You can keep going. These are just the questions over. Yeah. There we go. Thank you very much. So, as I said at the beginning, this is just sort of one of the pixels in the big image of collecting information to give us a clear picture on recommendations for the new plan. There are a number of other ways for you and your sort of peers and everyone else who you know within the community to get involved. There will be a survey launched very soon, likely at the end of this week or early next, and you will recognize some of the questions, but it is an opportunity for folks to sort of spread the message that this plan is being renewed and to get more sort of voices into the process. So I encourage you when that survey gets launched, and it'll be on a website, which is on the next slide, to share it around. Sorry. Oh, no, it's not on the next slide. Sorry. Can we go back to the previous slide? Okay. There are also other focus groups and facilitated sessions that are taking place in June. Now that we're at the end of May, we'll also be going to events where people are already spending their time and setting up a table and intercepting them that way. That can be a really effective tool for, not asking people to come to meetings or fill out a survey, but actually going where they already are and sort of getting their insights that way. Priya and the rest of our team will spend July and August synthesizing and analyzing the data we get, and then the fall we'll come back with some strategic priorities and report back to that question about making sure folks feel heard. When they provide input, there will be a report back to say, this is what we heard. Did we get it right? Did we get it mostly right? Or are there things that need to be adjusted? So that is our process. The website, Andrew, do you know what the website is for the? Thank you. Did folks hear that from Andrew? Yeah. Okay. And unless you have any questions, that rounds off our conversation. If you want to write a little bit more, Priya and I will hang out for 10 or 15 minutes. You can write more. And I really want to thank you for sharing your meeting on a busy time, and also all the great discussions I had with folks at the tables and what you wrote down. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Is there any quick questions for Josh and Priya before they go? I really want to thank you. I know that we went through this process. The Board of Trustees went through this process, but I'm really, really grateful that we're engaging with some of these other committees. And, SEAC is such an interesting and sort of different committee in sort of the students that we're representing and the various perspectives and views that we bring forward. So I think it's great. I'm glad we had this opportunity. We are often really, really trying to find ways to be engaged and to share these thoughts. And it was also nice hearing from other SEAC members, sort of some other questions, the answers to some of these questions. So on behalf of myself and SEAC, we're very, very grateful to have been a part of this process, and we look forward to the next step. So thank you so much for being here. Okay, so we are going to be moving along, and what we can do, I was going to say, Josh, Josh, if somebody thinks of something after the fact, and you've already collected these, I know that we have that other opportunity that they can engage with, right? So that's probably the best way for them to do that is when we launch that opportunity. Okay, perfect. And we can send the link out to all the SEAC members once that becomes available as far as easy access. Okay, so we're going to move to our next presentation, which is our special education budget presentation. So thank you so much to Superintendent Lofts for being here, and Aaron is the Superintendent of Business Services and Treasurer of the Board. We have you join us a few times a year, but definitely at this time every year to talk in more detail about the spec ed budget. So thanks so much for being here tonight, Aaron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here again. I was speaking to the mic, I guess, Brenda? Yeah, okay, we're good. That's okay. Yeah, okay, no problem. Okay, no worries. So I think the mic's on. Hopefully everyone can hear me at home. So the last time we met everyone was back in February 27th. We did some budget training at that point in time, and a lot has changed since February 27th. We have the grant for student needs was released in April. We got a little bit better idea on enrollment and things like that, as well as what our funding looks like for the fall for next year. So kind of just going through what we're going to look at tonight, and I just dropped my glasses. Normally, everyone, I don't really carry glasses, but I'm at the point now where I need to wear them. So maybe I'll just look up the screen, then I can see it a little bit. There we go. Thanks, Andrea. We're just going to look at the estimated enrollment. There's a big change that it kind of happened through COVID, and it's continuing on right now with respect to our enrollment. The budget consultation survey, won't spend too much time on that, but I thought it was interesting or pertinent to address that. The SEAC priorities, we received the priorities. It was forwarded on. So we have that. We'll look at that for a bit. Budget challenges. So that's a big one. So it's really not just necessary for SEAC or for spec ed, but really as a board itself, the challenges that we're facing. And then similar to other years, we'll look at the estimated revenues as well as the estimated expenses. And then any questions? So looking at this chart here, and I think we have the presentation too, so we can forward this out to everybody. So it's something that everyone will get a copy of this as well. So these numbers are large on my screen, small on that screen up there. But really the purpose of this is to kind of show our enrollment. Our enrollment at our board historically has been just on a direct incline, almost like a rocket. It was going up every year. We were going up, 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 up for 20 years, maybe even more. That's now stopped. And if you look at 2019-20, I kind of highlighted that in blue. That really would have been our last COVID type enrollment situation. So, or pre-COVID enrollment. Like I know COVID started in March of that year, but really our actual enrollments would not have been impacted by COVID. Looking at the next blue one is where we're at now. You can see there's a significant decrease between 2019-20 and 23-24 for our estimates. It's in the very far column over. So on elementary, we're down almost 1,600 students. Secondary, we're up, but a large part of that is some of the students that are already in our system that are then graduating into the secondary panel. So it's kind of just our students that were in those middle years are now in the upper years and into high school. But even more significant is looking at the year-over-year change. So even year-over-year on the elementary panel, we're down as well. So we're at about, that's the darker blue color versus the immediate change right next to it. We're down about 383 elementary students year over year, which is significant and impacts a lot of areas of our budget. I know we talked about it in February, but I'll mention it again. Enrollment is the biggest driver we have as an organization. So if enrollment's going down, we lose funding. To kind of put it into real terms, if I were to take our 2019-20 enrollment and apply it to our current year, our spec ed, I'm just only talking spec ed, not everything else, but spec ed would be up another 1.5 million in revenue. So it's significant. So it is something that we as a board are trying to deal with. It is a paradigm shift for us. We're something different. So the next screen, Andrea, please. Thank you. This is kind of just showing, you can see how we were going up, 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 and then COVID comes and you can see it start to come down. So that was more just a visual presentation of what I'm looking at. If we go to the next screen, Andrea, please. So what is this screen here? So grant per pupil. So there's 72 school boards in the province. We are the lowest funded. You probably heard me say this before. We are the lowest funded board of all 72. Our Coterminous board down the road might hear from them as well. They're the lowest public board in the province. We're the lowest overall board, as well, obviously the lowest Catholic board, and overall the lowest funded board in the province. So what I tried to do with this spreadsheet here is kind of just looking at the GTA board. So you can see Toronto Catholic, Toronto District, York, Durham, Peel, Hamilton, all the kind of our local boards, and just compared to that. I also took out certain criteria in the grants for student needs that were more specific to each board on an individual basis. So there's something called declining enrollment adjustment, which never used to apply to us, but now it does. Geographic circumstance grant. So that just basically is a grant based on where you reside in the province, based on geographic, just like it sounds, on your geographic location. Interest expense, again, that would be unique to each board. Not permanently financed capital debt, again, unique to each board. So I took all those individual grants out to try to look at apples to apples. Each board has the same or similar grant structure. So we're still, even in that model, the lowest. But even looking at it, you might think, well, what does that mean, right? We're the lowest. What does that mean in real dollars? So comparing us to our coterminous board down the road, we receive about $180 less per average daily enrollment per student. What does that equate to in dollars? Well, 180 times 35.3 or 35,000 roughly students is about $6.4 million. Well, what about the province? How do we compare to the provincial average? Well, we're down about $1,300 or so provincially. And what does that equate to? About $46 million. So you can see how we deal with the issue. We've been dealing for years and years. And when you're growing, you're able to absorb kind of those changes a little easier. Now that we've kind of had that shift, we're not seeing the same growth we had before. It's definitely impacting us as a board. So if we can just go to consultation. So how does a consultation survey work? Well, we talk with senior admin. We look at the stakeholders and we look at the budget holders. And from that, we issued our consultation back in February and into, actually, I guess it was more like March we did it. And then we got the results. So next screen. So our participation was a little lower this year than we was in the past. But we did get some feedback, and similar to other years, we kind of looked at what the feedback related to on spec ed, the spec ed lens. And a lot of some of the comments are similar to we've seen before. More spec ed teachers to support students, additional EAs, more funds needed for spec ed, assistive tech for students with IEPs. Bless you. So these are kind of the things we've seen before, right? It's nothing new we haven't seen. Our biggest, I guess, holdback in his funding is really a concern that we see. The one thing I thought was interesting, though, was request. It's on the next screen. Sorry, Andrea. Yep. Oh, sorry. You're at it, and there we go. Additional comments. So money should be focused on special education. Money is focused on special education. So we have to spend every dollar we generate for spec ed has to be spent on spec ed. So that's already happened. So you can rest assured that anything that we get is being spent and then some. And then I request additional funding for spec ed from the government. So that is something that that might be worth advocating for, is that we can only do so much here at the board level based on the resources we're provided with. So it's very prescribed how we generate our funding. And like I said, it's primarily based on enrollment. Now, spec ed does have a lot of other factors involved, as we all know, based on stats and statistics and such. So it's not purely based on enrollment. But like I said, if I use last year's enrollment, or sorry, the old enrollment from 1920, that's still 1.5 million that we'd have. And then the rest is kind of with some statistical analysis. So SEAC priorities. So, so this is some good news, I guess, on this one. So some of the SEAC priorities we had was reduce the assessment wait times. So the psychological wait times for assessments. We do have funding to support that. We did receive some additional funding this year, which we'll get into in a few slides. Additional continued tutoring catch up for learning gaps from COVID. The ministry has provided not necessarily just pretty spec ed, but as a system in general, early interventions in reading as well as in math. There's additional funding, quite a bit of funding in a Priorities and Partnership Fund, which used to be the similar funding as a EPO that you might have heard of in the past. Continued summer programs, again, that has continued as well. So that is some good news that some of the things that were part of your priorities, the ministry has provided us funding for that through a PPF. So PPF is kind of like a one and done. We get it each year. It's not tied to the GSN. So the GSNs are the grants for student needs, which is through a regulation, which we get pretty much once it's in a GSN, you're pretty much going to get that money every year. A PPF is more for single year use. So now it can go for multiple years, but each year we'd have to receive our allocation directly. Whereas when it's in the regulation, it's pretty much there all the time. We just have to update it on a yearly basis to see what the change in the allocation is. So budget challenges, all the good times. Budget challenges for this upcoming year. So I'm not sure people know here, but we had a significant deficit this past year that we've been dealing with. Again, the declining enrollment is staying with us. So that was a big part of it. What we were expecting and which came in the fall were two different levels. COVID. So COVID has, I guess it's still here. We're still seeing the residual impact of COVID through obviously for reading enhancements, math and such. But for all intents and purposes, I think we can safely say that COVID, or at least what we were dealing with the last few years ago, is hopefully over. And from that, we're also no longer receiving any COVID funding. So we received about 5.4 million as a board for COVID funding for this current year. We will not be receiving that next year as the pandemic is essentially, we've moved on from that. Now we have on the revenue side, there's a few things here. We have minimal increase in non-salary funding. So we have had, I'm not gonna say record inflation, but I'd have to say highest inflation that I've probably had in my adult life. I don't think we've seen this level of inflation in my lifetime, other than like including my parents when they went to the 20% and such in the 80s. But at least in the last 20, 30 years, these levels have been pretty high in the 8 to 9%. We're still high. We're still in the over 4%. Our funding during COVID, the ministry did provide additional funding to kind of help at least with inflation. I think it was about 4.85% or so, at least to help on the facility side where we had all our utilities and such to kind of help with that. It wasn't enough to cover it, but it definitely did assist. Now it's been down to 2%. So now it's a 2% increase on our facility side. So for utilities, things like that, it doesn't increase 2% across the board. All our budget is not increased by 2%. If you look at some of the grants for computers and classroom supplies and stuff, they have not changed much in the last 6 years. So that dollar amount is pretty much stagnant. So that is a concern. There's a couple of other things. I might be getting more technical. CPP and EI, as we're all going to feel it, it's going to go up. We're not receiving any additional funding for that from the ministry. That's an impact. So we have to find that savings within our existing budgets. Sick leave continues to be a concern for us as a board. We were funded a set amount to cover that, and it's not sufficient. Now that is not just Halton Catholic's problem. That's a board, or not a board-wide, but a province-wide issue that we're all contending with. So all these things add up to have an impact on our budget, a negative impact on our budget. And you multiply that by the declining enrollment that we're seeing, it's really a serious concern. Maybe we'll go to the next slide, if you could, Andrea, please. Yep. So, as I say there, ministry benchmarks do not fully address HCDSB's annual programming costs. So, really, spec ed hasn't really been impacted, at least from an expense side of it, from a service level. But you can see that it's really increasing year after year. So we had a shortfall of 3.2, which is really where we were for pretty much a number of years. We're always in that 3.2 million. There was funding that we were getting that we weren't necessarily including, something called the Q&E adjustment, which is essentially for our teachers that adjust their salary based where they're on the grid. So we received that, and it was a difficult exercise to pull that out. So we knew it wasn't necessarily 3.2, but at least there was some money to offset that. But really, since COVID, with the combine of the needs and the increasing enrollment, you can see that we've gone from 3.2 to 5.7, 7.1, 9.1, and now we're at 10.4 this year for the estimate for the upcoming year. Excuse me. So one thing I will mention is that the number of students we're servicing is also increased. So our enrollment has gone down, so our funding has gone down, but our service expectation has increased. So the number of students that we're servicing as an organization has increased. So, which is contributing as well to our shortfall. If we can just go maybe to, yeah. So we've kind of looked at this back in, maybe I'll just kind of skip over this one. We looked at this back in February as well, but the next few slides are interesting. Well, from an accountant's perspective, I find them interesting, but I don't know if anyone else here does. So this is our funding for spec ed. So how are we funded? You can see that we have the SEPA, the student education per pupil amount at the top, which is about half our funding or so, about almost 20, a little bit over $28 million. That's funded on a pure pupil basis. So there's our enrollment. That's not spec ed enrollment. That is enrollment of our system, right? Of all our kids, all our students. There's the amount per pupil. So if you look, I'll just look at the first one, for example, JK to 3, about almost 10,000 students there. We're funded at about almost $1,100, and that brings us about a little bit over almost $11 million. And you can see that same logic is applied to the other grade levels. You can see too that the funding level decreases as the grade level goes up. So then we have the SEA claims, which I think everyone here is familiar with. That is it's kind of like a non-computer based equipment funding where you have the original expense has to be over $800. So it's an $800 deductible to it. So you have your $800 deductible, and then you're funding on top of that, and it's a claims based amount. Then we get down into the kind of the middle of the page there, which is kind of a lot of the statistical information that we receive. So stats can, a whole bunch of other statistical models. Sorry, I need a drink. Mouth is getting dry here. I'm talking too much, everyone. I apologize. Which kind of looks at, again, it's kind of outside of our enrollment base per se, but it's more based on the region that we're in. And that does impact, and I'm kind of going to take a step back. We are the lowest funded board, but part of that is the region that we're in statistically, right? With like our scores and things like that impacts what we receive as well. We have the SIP amount there, and that's kind of just an estimate. We just scroll down just a little bit. Yeah, 1.5 million there. And then we'll go to the next page, it's continuation of revenue. So then we get to our behavioral experts and such. So there's also a per pupil amount here, based again on our enrollment. So you remember or not, but we had about 22,000 or so elementary students. So there's our 22,000, and there's our 13,250 estimate for secondary. And you can see that's applied to both panels, the elementary and secondary, giving us about $600,000 or so. The early math intervention. So this is some good news. So this was the PPFs. Remember before I was saying it's kind of that one and done funding. We get it and then we're done with it. This one actually was put into the GSN. So now we at least know it's more regular. We're going to be getting that on a go forward basis. So there's a base amount of about 107 or so thousand. And then there's a per ADE. So ADE is average daily enrollment. So for every student that we have, obviously it's early math. So we're getting it actually on all our elementary. So I guess just good, not just JK to 3. And there's an extra 10,000 or so. So not a lot, but it's something. So if we go to the next slide, Pupil Foundation. So what's that? So Pupil Foundation, there actually is an amount in the Pupil Foundation. So that's their biggest grant for our students. So it includes our teacher salaries, our EAs, our ECEs, our computers for the schools, our classroom supplies. I'm probably missing something. Guidance, teachers, things like that. So that's our big, anything that runs a school is in there. So we do receive about but not much, but about 270 or so thousand for EA. So I include that in the revenue as well. Not much, but it's something. And then we have the announced PPF. So that's that priorities and partnership funds I was talking, the one and done that we don't know on a year by year basis if we're getting it or not. So usually the ministry announces more funding as the year goes on, but these are the first ones that they've announced for us as part of the grant for student needs that they announced back in April. So what is that 532? So I mentioned before we got funding for the assessments. So we had that the previous year. We have it again, about 174,000. There's some qualifications funding, not much. It's an application base for our teachers to get spec ed qualifications. It's only about 16,000 or so there. But there is spec ed summer learning, 155, and the summer mental health funding as well. So that's about 188. So all those add up to about 532,000. The self-contained classroom, so that's a GSN reallocation. You're going to see the revenue here and offsetting expense on the other side. So I put it in here just to account for that reallocation of revenue. The last little part here is our SEAC equipment amount. So whatever allocation is, everyone, if we don't spend it on SEAC equipment, we carry it forward for the upcoming year. So that's something, remember I mentioned before, is all our spec ed goes to spec ed. So here's an example where we actually might not necessarily spend it all in the current year. So we reserve it. It's actually in a deferred revenue, and then we bring it in the following year. So we just kind of, for budgeting anyways, we made the assumption we're spending it all. So that's why there's a change of 1.5 million year over year. So that comes to our 55, almost $56 million in revenue for spec ed as a system. So maybe if we could we skip forward on these? These are kind of the GSN. We've kind of gone through these before, but we go to page 24, enter at the PPFs. So it's a little more information on just the PPFs. I kind of talked to them a little bit, but the first one is that qualifications for our teachers, about 16,000 or so. But the next one, summer learning, spec ed support. So something interesting or good that came out of this PPF was there was a commitment by the ministry, not only for this summer, but for next summer as well. So for 2023 summer, as well as 2024. So usually when you're getting the GSNs, you only get it for next year, but the commitment was we have some money for this year as well. Professional assessments, again, that's about 174,000 or so. I think we're familiar with that. And then the summer mental health supports. Again, this is similar to the summer learning, is that this funding is also been given to us for this current year, 2023, as well as next year. There's commitment for next year as well. So that is some positive news on this. The expenses. Good times. So these are all the expense. You can see here, everyone, these are all, spec ed is primarily its salaries and benefits that we have as a system. That is our biggest expense, spec ed. It's about 92% or so of our expenditures in special education is salaries and benefits. So you can see here, it's just the funding side of the cost. I won't spend too much time in it. Pretty sure everyone here probably knows who these people are, who they are in our organization. I'm sure we deal with them on a more regular basis. So if we just go to the next slide though, Andrea. So you can see that the salary side of it is about $60.7 million. Other expenditures, so there could be a lot of things, PD, assistive technology, computers, stuff like that, is about $5.5 million. And the total is about $66 million. So I have a little note there, and it's just saying that note one, that section of the expense actually doesn't necessarily go against the spec ed envelope. It goes into another envelope called the Board Administration and Governance Grant, or the BAG, you might have heard. So that's one thing. And one thing I did exclude from this is spec ed transportation. So I didn't include spec ed transportation in this analysis. We do have additional funding, not additional funding, we have a shortfall in transportation too, but it's not necessarily due to special education why there's that shortfall. So you can see there's no revenue for transportation, nor is there an expense, so I excluded that analysis. So that kind of takes us to our deficit. So we said 10.4, it still is 10.4. You can see I put that note. There's other areas of GSN then to complement special education that's not being captured here, help close the gap. And there is, that's kind of the stuff like the Q&E grant is the big one that I think of that's not necessarily in here. So that 10.4 is probably a little less than that. But it's the same logic we held when we were at 3.2 as well. So it is something that it's not sustainable for our board if we're in that predicament that we're in right now. Because that 10.4 needs to come from other areas of the organization to cover it. So as it stands for next year, it's pretty much status quo. There was no impact really to spec ed that we had in the budget. So that concludes everyone on that, I guess, sobering message there. I'm open for any questions from anyone.
Anybody have any questions for Aaron on the budget presentation? Maria?
So I have a couple of clarification and then. So did you say that our funding per student is $1,300 less than the provincial average?
Yeah,
That's a big number.
that is, yeah.
What's our total funding per student? Like what percentage is that?
As a percentage, it's, well, dollar wise, it's about 40 something. I guess it'd be about.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you mentioned about the CPP and EI shortfall. Do you have a number for that? Like, do we know?
Over 500,
Sorry?
over 500,000.
Over 500,000 of the total budget.
Yes.
Okay. And then, I mean, you've acknowledged that we have a shortfall in spec ed, which means that money comes from somewhere else. That somewhere else also has a shortfall. Not like that's a problem. So is there, like, we know how we're going to solve that as a board? Like that can't continue like that, as you've said, right? So is there, like, what's going to, like?
We're going to have to, well, we have other areas. We're fortunate in other areas where we're very efficient. It's helping us. So our facilities department, we're the most efficient board in the province. So that helps our utility allocation. So we receive additional, we have a revenue received for facilities, and we're able to use some of the savings there from being efficient to apply to help us in these situations like we're expecting.
Okay, so I'm just a little bit confused. So, but that would already be reflected in the overall budget, right? Those efficiencies, but even with those efficiencies, we have a deficit.
This current year we do. So there's going to be, there's a staffing, getting really indefinite, but there's a staffing model that we're looking at based on what we're funding. So that's going to help with that deficit.
Because I thought we had deficits in previous years too, right?
We had deficit. You're right. We did have one that was more COVID related. So the COVID kind of went up and down, right? One year we had a big surplus, next year we had a deficit. So over the 2 years, it was really neutral. And then we had the one this year that we had. It was 3.9 million. As it stands, we'll be bringing a budget to trustees, a draft budget next week. So we're looking at least as it stands right now, to have a budget like we're used to. So our expenditures will equal our revenue.
Sorry, so for the funding that comes from the ministry, people funding, I was looking at it for at the very bottom, the lowest. You mentioned it's facing a number of factors, but why is the Halton Public Board get more than us if we would have the same geographical factors? I don't get what's the difference.
It is a great question. Yeah, I don't necessarily have an answer for you.
Who solves for that? Like, who does solves for that? In terms of like, in terms of, we don't necessarily know why the difference, like why they get funded more than us. So like who's able to explain and how do you solve for that as a board? Like who knocks on the ministry's door and says we need more money and it's not fair and challenge their calculation? Like, I don't know.
Well, I can maybe start. So for some of the general funding shortfalls that every board has. So we have some with, like I mentioned before, the EI, the CPP, the sick leave, things like that. That's kind of, it kind of goes, there's a lot of organizations within education. So we have the Trustee Association brings that forward. There's a Superintendents of Business, COSBO is what I'm part of. We send our information to the ministry to say, hey, this is an issue. How can it be addressed? We can't really do anything about it. So however much money is coming from the Treasury Board, we get our portion from there. So those are all brought forward this year, and it is what it is, right? We're dealing with what we have. Individually, I know the public board does have a few things that are different than us. So they have some of the like they have a section 23 school. So they have something a little over and above what we have on our side. But there are areas that that you're right, where they get funded more or we get funded less. It's something that's been brought up for years. Ever since I've been at our board, we've been the lowest funded board in the province. So it doesn't appear to be changing. Part of it is though too, everyone, it's also demographics based too. So part of the region of Halton, at least why Halton Public and Halton Catholic are maybe some of the lower funded boards or the two lowest boards in the province is just based on some of our metrics that we have in this region. So that impacts too, as well as the funding. So the bigger one is the difference between the two boards and the variation in funding between the two of us. So I got to put that in there as more to show you, like sometimes you hear $180 per student. You don't really, it's not that much. No, it is. It's a lot. So
Just to your point, Andrea, about, this has been an ongoing issue, and I know that there are conference calls and conversations that happen with the ministry, but John, I don't know if you have anything you could add for that.
Yeah, so those inequities are ones that are acknowledged and beyond the alphabet soup of organizations in education that advocate OXBOA and OXTA and other usually O starting ones. I'll add CODE, which is the Council of Directors of Education. So all 72 boards obviously have directors of education, and those directors of education advocate as much as we can to the ministry. I was with some directors on Friday, and we had Clayton Latouche, who's from the Ministry of Education. He's one of the ADMs for special education, and he, in fact, he's in charge of the provincial schools. So Stephanie Ballo, who used to be here, he was hired by her, so I gave him heck for doing that. But he was saying they will refrain, and Minister Lecce has done this before. He'll say, in terms of real numbers, we're adding more to so they keep hammering away at the same, well, we're giving 20 or whatever it is, 30 or $50 million more. But it's, as Superintendent Loftus has pointed out, it's not real money. When you think of inflation, when you think of rising costs, it's not keeping up. There is a little perversity in that sometimes they disincentivize those who are doing well. So sometimes if you're doing well in something, you get less money, which I've never understood necessarily in either home economics or in macroeconomics. But I think that is one of them as well. But there is advocacy going on. I think we could probably have other voices resound, to help with that. But it's we don't have as much fat at our board as other boards as well, so it makes it harder. Most Catholic boards don't. We don't have as big reserves that other boards have had. That in some cases go on for have been rooted in generations of. Public boards often have had more resources than we do. Section 23 schools, my memory of being in charge of them at Waterloo that's separate funding as well. So I think that's another envelope of money. It's like SEAC claims as well. These are all separate. So in terms of the per pupil disparity, I'm kind of mystified by it. And I think it's a reminder to me as director is to maybe go ring that doorbell once again and ask, please, sir, can we have some more?
We also, just as an extra side note, we do, trustees try to meet with MPPs on a local level. to sort of build some of those relationships at that political level. And we try to do that on a fairly regular basis. It's been obviously some new elections and some new positions that people are in, but we try to do that. So, I mean, recently we just had the trustees, and we had 5 MPPs join us at Thomas Merton to talk about some of the great work that's going on in the board, and to talk about, you know, some of the challenges and identifying the programs that we're offering and things like that, and then allowing those trustees to have those conversations. So, you know, it's not necessarily in a formalized manner like a letter or other things, but it's a great way. You know, we tour schools with MPPs so we can show them some of the deficits or downfalls that we're seeing in some of our schools and where some of the needs are. And so, you know, certainly that's another excellent opportunity to just make some additional, you know, inroads with trying to highlight for them some of the challenges we have as being one of the, well, being the lowest funded board.
Yeah, so just one question and then just a comment, but did we send off the letter from SEAC about the funding? I know we got the draft letter. I wasn't sure if it had gone out this year.
I don't think it's gone out yet. Maria, I think there was some other pieces that Rick was trying to put together, but he's not here. So I'll follow up with him in an email and let you know.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I thought it was done. And then I guess just a comment, I know that there was a question about like, why do we get so much less funding than Halton Public Board? And I know you mentioned the demographics, so I guess that kind of might explain why Halton, the 2 Halton boards are at the bottom, but it really doesn't, and I know you don't have an answer, but it really doesn't explain why Halton District and Halton Catholic are not more similar. We have the same demographics, unless, I mean, it does seem like the Catholic boards are funded less than their public counterparts, so maybe there's a little adjustment in the formula for that. I don't know. It's, anyway.
They used to be actually reversed. We used to be slightly higher than that. That was before I was here. And from a funny perspective, or when I came here, back to
Is there any other questions, comments? Trustee Saunders?
Yes, sorry, Superintendent Loss, can you remind us, we went through the EDC process this year. What do we anticipate getting next year as a result of upping that? What's our ballpark?
that's
Just to follow up. So from what I recall, that we were paying interest on a lot of this land that we bought. Now, this interest though is part of our financial statements, right? So we'll be able to cover off. Sorry.
Madam Chair. Yes, I forgot. There's people at home, so I apologize everyone for that. To your point, Trustee Saunders, that interest is an EDC eligible expense as well. So it's not a cost to our operating budget at all. It's kept separate and it applies against the EDC. So as we get our EDC revenue in, it'll also pay for that interest. So there's no bottom line impact to our operating budget.
Are there any other questions or comments that are specific to the spec ed budget? No? Good. Okay. Well, thank you
Okay.
so much, Superintendent Lofts.
Thank
And
you, Madam
as
Chair.
always, if you walk out of here and there's a question that comes to you or something comes to your mind, or you're looking for clarification, or you're just, there was a lot of stuff that was presented. Some of us have had the opportunity to have this presentation repeatedly over the years. We still learn something new because the PPFs change and funding things change. But if you do have a question or anything, please feel free to reach out to Superintendent Lofts. He's great about connecting to answer those questions for you. Thanks again very much. Okay, so moving along to item number 4, which is approval of the minutes. So we've got 2 sets of minutes to approve. We have got the minutes from the March 20th. We've got the minutes from the March 20th. Hold on, I wonder if those copies of the minutes would have been provided for you in your meeting packages. So I'm going to go ahead with the approval of the minutes. So we'll go with the first one, which is 4.1. Does anybody have any questions about them? Okay, seeing none, could I get a motion to move the approval of the minutes of the March 20th SEAC meeting?
Yes, I'll move it.
Thank you, Trish. And seconded? Mandy? Yeah. All right. There'll be another chance. Okay, so moving to item 4.2 is minutes of the April 24th, 2023 SEAC meeting. So again, those will have been provided for you in your meeting package. So if I could get someone to move that we approve the minutes of the April 24th meeting.
I'll move it.
Okay, Trish, seconded. All right, Amanda, perfect. Thank you so much. All right, moving on to item number 5, which is business arising. So summary of outstanding items from previous meetings. That as well would have been in your board package, in your meeting package. Is there any questions at all on that? All right, moving on to item number 6, which is the special education board policy review. And I'm going to turn this over. This is item 6.1. I'm going to turn this over to Superintendent Rossini to speak to that.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So in your package, you were provided with a draft copy of the feedback that we had presented to you, and access feedback from SEAC, and put it all together for your observation. Oh, thank you. I can speak this way then. So if you noticed at the front part of the first page, we've just added a couple of policies and procedures around equity and inclusive education. And continuing down, what we did was just put the references in alphabetical order. So we didn't add any references, we just put them in alphabetical order. On the following page, staff incorporated the feedback that we received from SEAC. So one of the pieces of feedback that we received was to include comment around accessibility. And so we included that comment in the first paragraph that says that's in red. That says the planning, administration, and interpretation of the assessment must be made carefully, recognizing the student's individual accessibility needs. And I do want to thank that piece of feedback. It's important and it reflects an update to the policy. The other piece of feedback that we received from our equity and inclusion senior manager had to do with the inclusion of language that supported our equity and inclusion initiatives. And so she provided us with the second sentence. The review of the process and analysis of the assessment will be guided by an anti-racist and anti-oppressive framework. The third piece of feedback that we received had to do with the language of the assessment, and I'm going to recommend that we keep it silent for now. It's been silent for a while in this policy. And there's some indication in the right to read document from the Ontario Human Rights that indicates to boards that they will need to develop some criteria around psychological assessments. And I'll read the back end of it. It talked about the OHRC recommends school boards develop clear, transparent, written criteria and processes for referring students with suspected reading disabilities for psychoeducational assessment based on their response to intervention and not a minimum age or grade. The criteria should make sure that multilingual students, culturally diverse students, racialized students, students who identify as First Nations, Métis or Inuit, and students learning in French immersion have equal access to assessments. So I am recommending that we do leave that part silent for now. And when we do revisit the policy in 3 years, we'll probably have some better language once the board has established criteria. But if I can just brag for a minute about what the board has done so far. It has developed a process for psychological assessments in speech and language for students that are multilingual and not, as they indicated in the right to read, sitting on any wait lists any longer for looking at proficiency in terms of language acquisition, that we do have a set of criteria already established around what that assessment would look like, and a flow chart, and it's for elementary and secondary, and there are tracking forms. And I would be happy to have the team that's been working on that present that to you next year, or next school year, I should say, if you're interested in more information. But I think it's very exciting work. We've worked with the multilingual folks and have developed some integration around what we do with psychological assessments. And at what point do we get involved with students that are struggling, who are multilingual learners? So that's why I'm recommending that we leave it silent for now. And that is it.
Thank you, Superintendent Rossini. Is there any questions at all on that before it goes forward? Maria?
Yeah, sorry, I missed the beginning of the agenda item because I had to have a bio break there. So I don't know if I missed, this has already been answered, but trying to understand what's happened here, because a few meetings ago, I had made a motion with some specific changes, and it was requested for a red line version to go out for feedback, which did happen.
Okay, so
sorry, can I just, if I can just finish. And then the only feedback I saw was like with respect to one phrasing. So I don't, like, what happened to all that? That was the recommendation that came from SEAC, which is our role here. So I don't know where we are.
Yeah. So what happened with that, Marie, is we took in the feedback, and I was, I'm sorry you went for a bio break, but I can repeat a little bit of where we've embedded it into the policy. So one piece of the feedback had to do with accessibility, and we included the language of accessibility in the policy. Another piece of the feedback had to do with equity and inclusion, and we've included language around equity and inclusion in the same red paragraph as the accessibility phrase. And I just finished explaining why we left the notion of language silent for now, awaiting further work by the board around criteria for looking at psychological assessments for students who are multilingual, and I can read it at another time. So for sure, this feedback has been embedded in the policy, and in the SEAC Code of Conduct, it said that SEAC members can provide feedback on policies impacting special education students. And I do want to reassure you that there is that respectful inclusion in the feedback that you've provided to us. And this is the policy and its revisions that will go forward to the Policy Review Committee.
Maria?
So yeah, I don't see how the changes have been incorporated. They were very specific. They talked about not using anti-racist or anti-oppressive, to using more broader language, to talking about biases, et cetera. Like it feels, and our role on SEAC is to provide advice to the board, which is the Board of Trustees, right? Not to staff and like not, it's to be directly to the board.
It
So
is.
So I'm just, like, it feels very dismissive. It feels like that was just kind
No.
of brushed aside and it's been, like, I don't know where it went. It's
Yeah.
not in there. I don't see the
Abs-
feedback
yeah.
in there.
Absolutely
Superintendent
not.
Racine,
Maria,
yeah.
no, I want to reassure you that that process was followed. Where when it comes to reviewing a policy, we bring the policies that have to do with special educations, with students with special education needs to SEAC. We bring a version to you that we've already edited or revised or whatever that might serve our purposes better now than it did 3 years ago. And then we ask SEAC to provide their input to us, and then we submit that to the policy review committee. That's the process, Maria. And I really appreciate your enthusiasm around wanting to embed it into a motion. And I would certainly, visit with you offline again to show where those, where that feedback that you provided and others is in the policy now that we're bringing forward. But that's the role of SEAC, is to provide feedback. And I don't want you to feel that it's dismissive at all. In terms of the equity and inclusion language, it is consistent with the policy on equity and inclusion. It's consistent with other policies that we have. And I feel it's important to be consistent on behalf of SEAC as well.
Maria?
So I'm not sure. It's hard to see the screen, but I don't know if that's the same thing that we got in the board report or in our agenda, because I see blue there, but my copy doesn't have blue. Is there not blue there? Okay. So, I mean, anyways, we can debate this back and forth, I guess, but unless what SEAC presented is actually going forward to the board, I feel like, this is kind of one of the roadblocks I was talking about in our earlier strategic planning session. It's stopped here and it shouldn't. It should go to trustees if it's a feedback that's coming from SEAC. So we can talk about it offline, that's fine, but unless what SEAC, like I didn't see any objections from SEAC members to what was brought forward. So I'm not sure why that's not going to the board, but I can share it with the board directly anyway. So that's okay.
But it is going to the board through the policy committee.
So sorry, are you saying this is what staff's recommending and what we brought forward is also going to the policy committee?
This is a combination of the feedback that we've received from you.
I don't see that.
And the feedback that we received from staff. If I could just address something for a moment around the roadblock issue. When I looked up the role of an alternate for special ed advisory committee, it is not to provide feedback, it is to be an observer. And so I think there's been a generosity around this table around accessing feedback from alternates. And that generosity comes right from the chair. The role of the alternate is to participate in orientation sessions. It's to remain an observer if you attend the meetings, and only until such time that the main alternate, the main person is not able to fulfill their obligations, do they step forward and then provide feedback. So I do not want you to leave this room feeling that you have not been heard. You have been heard, and there have been no roadblocks in this case.
Maria?
Yeah, I've been on this committee for 8 years and it's always been open for alternates to participate as much as main members, always for the last 8 years. And the day that I brought the motion forward, I was sitting in the seat of the main member. I was asked to withdraw it so that there could be feedback, et cetera. So this is a change from how this committee's been run for the last 8 years is what I'm hearing today.
I think what I'd like to gather from other members around the table is, taking a look at that policy. You would have been provided initially with the initial changes that were suggested by Maria. And then there's now this copy that has been made available that I believe is collaborative in trying to, as Suzanne said, try to bring together some of those commonalities with respect to some of the recommendations. And, you know, I just want to get some feedback from some of the other members here. Are you okay with how it's been put together now, as far as bringing that forward? Because that's going to be a recommendation that comes from SEAC, as opposed to from one individual. So I just want to ensure that if we're putting it forward as a recommendation from SEAC, that the members of SEAC are okay with that policy recommendation going forward. So I would just encourage other people, if there's something that you wanted to speak to about that, to please have a chance to do so before we send this forward.
I mean, I feel like we've had our opportunity to provide our feedback. I mean, that's all really I could ask for, is that you're considering our feedback. You are the professionals in the field. So you've gone through the policy, you've shared it. I don't have any issues with what's put together. So I feel like it's been fulfilled in terms of receiving our feedback. We've had conversation, we've had discussion. I personally don't have an issue with what's there, but that's my.
Thank you. I think the issue that was raised wasn't whether she was heard at the meeting or not. I think the issue was if the feedback was gathered to be brought to the board, then it should be carried to the board. I think that's what was the issue. And I share the same sentiments as my alternate rep. Thank you.
So I think the only piece with that is, and I don't disagree, we're trying to bring something forward, but it keeps being referenced as SEAC feedback, but it wasn't SEAC feedback in how it was, you know, there was no finalization on that coming from SEAC. So I think it's great that we've had individual members that have provided feedback. I feel confident that superintendent has taken that feedback, done some work, tried to make it reflective of other, you know, the language that's currently being used. There was some procedural pieces that were brought into that. Those have been removed because they're procedural. And I really truly believe that the work, the document that's come back is one of a collaborative nature that is saying, I saw the feedback that was provided, you know, by one of our members of SEAC, you know, tried to work that in to where that makes sense, and then bring that back to SEAC as a collection to say, is everybody okay with this? So, you know, really at the end of it, I think we're sending forward a document that we're not going to send forward something if SEAC is not in agreement with it. If people have an issue with what they see here, we're not going to bring it forward. If people are okay with it, then we'll bring it forward. And then it becomes a recommendation that's coming from SEAC. So I just, you know, I think it's important to recognize that. Rhonda?
So I wholeheartedly agree with what's happened here. And I do feel this is a lovely marriage of what was being presented by one of the members, alternate, and and her primary, and also what you've, great. So Voice supports this document.
Andy?
Yeah. So I was just going to say that originally I did read this first sentence and I had a quick thought, oh, this is a bit different. And I was sick away last meeting, unfortunately. And you're welcome. I didn't bring you my germs. But yeah, so I thought, oh, it's a bit different. But again, recognizing that we provided many different pieces of feedback and, you know, collaboration does take everybody's feedback. But what really made me feel more comfortable is Superintendent, what you mentioned about having the policy that's now going to be developed. I think you said over 3 years, but in 1 year we'll review, you know, what they're, I don't know if it was procedure or policy, but they're putting together the plan, how to implement. And so that has more opportunity to see what, and I think you missed it, unfortunately, on the break, but there is going to be implementation of how to implement and do the analysis in a proper way that to me sounded like it's incorporating what we recommended. So I think that piece gives a little more satisfaction than just this particular sentence. It's a broader thing. That's what made me feel more comfortable.
Is there any other questions or comments, Maria?
Yeah, I've had my hand up before.
Respectfully, other members hadn't spoken yet, so I wanted to give them a chance, but please go ahead.
So just to comment on the point of whether the feedback was from one SEAC member or the committee, any feedback, any recommendation that comes forth will originate from one person, right? We're not sharing one brain. So everything's going to originate from one person. It did go out for feedback. I didn't see anybody objecting to the wording. There wasn't a lot of feedback received, but I didn't see anybody objecting. The one person that did reply said they were fine with it. They just had one part that they had a challenge with. So, you know, this isn't from SEAC either, right? This is coming from staff. So I think that's kind of belittling the process to say came from one person and not from SEAC as a whole.
Sorry, may I just through you, Madam Chair? I did not get that impression at all that it was just from staff. This has our input in it. So can I just also, may I say something?
Yes.
I feel like there is a very disrespectful tone in here. And I don't know if it's I'm just super sensitive to tone and intonation. And there is just a feeling in here. And I think we need to remember that we're all in here for a good reason. We're all in here to help whatever background we're bringing and to help children. I'm not saying this right, but I just feel like we need to remember we're all working together. We can disagree, but we don't need to be rude. And I'm sorry, I'm just really feeling it. And it's getting worse. So
sorry, point of order, that's basically trying to suggest that somebody's rude, and I think that that's not inappropriate, and that's not in line with our code of conduct either.
Trustee Saunders, you had your hand up?
Disagree. I don't think this is a rude discussion at all. I think it's just a disagreement.
I don't think we're going to enter into debate about that. I think we're able to share some things respectfully and have respectful discussions. So thank you to everybody for their comments. I would like to see, I guess, a show of hands. Are we okay moving this forward to the policy committee as recommendations from our committee? So good. Okay, great. And thank you, Superintendent Rossini. Moving on to 7.1, action and information items. The special education plan summary of changes. Jody O'Reilly and Superintendent Rossini, you're up. So if you wouldn't mind, that would be great.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to make sure it was okay to start.
Thanks, Jody. Sorry.
Okay, through you, Madam Chair. So just first, I want to thank everyone that was on the SEAC subcommittee for their work and involvement with the special education plan. And you would have received a copy in tonight's package that includes the summary of changes and the red line version of the spec ed plan. And the summary of changes does include includes feedback from SEAC consultation process, the subcommittee, as well as staff edits and updates. So I'll just go over the summary of changes. So we did embed some in the introduction and overview, and thanks, Andrea, equity and inclusion language. In the special education plan consultation process, we did update dates. We did add the CLC class and board report. In the model for special education, we added some detail in the first paragraph and some of these minor edits to some wording. They're embedded throughout some of these changes as well. In the IPRC process, changes to the links that were expired and incorporated the SEAC suggestion for a new chart that includes identified and non-identified data. So we were able to include that, which I think it does better reflect the supports that we're providing in our board around students with special education needs. For our student independence, we reduced, just updated that we reduced the domains from 7 to 6 for the independence rubric and separated into secondary and elementary. In the IEP section, we did keep the last 5 years of the historical review. It did date back many, many years. So we did delete a lot of that, but kept the last 5 years and added some information and clearer language on dispute resolution. In the special education support processes section, we changed the section title to include our tiered model of intervention language and moved some additional pieces around related to the tiered model of intervention because it has been, year over year we do review and sometimes it becomes a little bit piecemealed together. So we did try to be more concise in that information. In the transition planning, we updated information regarding the kindergarten information session. Roles and responsibilities, we added the IEA role, updated some links, updated some numbers. Again, in the early identification procedures and intervention strategies, just took some of that language and made it more concise around the tiered approach. In the psych ed assessments, took out the list of specific tests used for psych ed assessments. Updated in the gifted screening process regarding assessment of English language learners. And then our staff development, we always update every year to include those ministry and board initiatives. And updated the SEAC directory and added additional staff presentations that were presented at SEAC. So yeah, so following this, I'm not sure if there's any points of clarifications or any questions, but we will finalize our plan. There's a checklist, I'm told, that our esteemed director will complete and send to the ministry in July. So.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody that was on the committee. These are some fantastic changes and additions. So I was really happy to see sort of the level of detail that was put forward. So thank you to everybody for that. Was there any questions or clarifications with respect to the spec ed plan summary of changes? Yeah, Superintendent Rossini. Yeah, please.
I did meet with the two members from ABC last week virtually. And I did want to provide a clarification around an item that came up at the end of the conversation last SEAC meeting. So there will be no change to our plan regarding gifted screening. However, for external assessments brought to the attention of the psych staff, there is no age threshold for the identification of gifted. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Rossini. Okay. All right, moving on to, thank you, Johnny. Moving on to 7.2, you're back up again for the summary of student exceptionalities.
All right. So this one I have a little less to say, but you would have received the summary of exceptionalities from 2021 and 2022, and then the updated from 22, 23. And for those of you that were with us last year, and for those of you that weren't, but a reminder and new information, last year's summary of exceptionalities were based on ELITE data. So you may see a change in the numbers there, and I think some of those changes are related to that. So typically we take it from the ONSIS, but there was, because of the changeover from Trillium to Power School, we were having difficulty last year getting ONSIS numbers. So we gathered data from ELITE. So there may be some discrepancies that were, noted, I guess, if you will, year over year. Now we will consistently move forward with our ONSIS data. But yeah, so it's there for you. I didn't know if there was any questions that you had around that.
I know that this is always a popular conversation or topic that comes up quite frequently at the table. Is there any questions or clarifications or anything at all for, Jessica?
Thank you. Not a question. I think this is great. Once we have 2, 3, 4 years of data, then we can start seeing trends. Thank you. This is great.
Rhonda?
Like, as I've always said, it's always just so hard for me in terms of the MEX category, like who's in there?
In the what, sorry?
The ME category.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, I know.
Yeah, so
I
because
know.
I know when 40% of deaf and hard of hearing students, 40% of them have another exceptionality attached. So yeah, I just don't always feel like I'm getting that in terms of the DHH piece.
Yeah.
It's frustrating.
I know. I appreciate that feedback. And it is, as you know, as we say this every year, it's the ministry, it's the way they collect the data and the way it's reported on, and that's how they collect that same data. So, yeah.
Yeah, Andrea?
Sorry, what is no exceptionality mean?
So, yeah, so actually the student hasn't been identified officially through the IPRC process. So they're on a non-identified IEP. Yeah. Just to note, sometimes there's questions about why we have that many in there. But it was interesting. I was at OCASE with some of my colleagues the other day, and across the province, the no exceptionality data is 53%. Our board is at 25%. So it is much lower. We do, as I've always said, we do IPRC students, not just to go into specialized classes, but all of our students when they meet the identification.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is kind of echoing what Rhonda said, but in regards to the multiple exceptionalities, is there anywhere, like, is that data anywhere to know what exceptionalities they fall into, to know, a broader understanding of the students in general?
So yes, in ELITE and caseload. So there's sort of two pieces. It's not easily pulled, but it can be done to look to see, because you have to kind of piece out who has DHH and LD. Well, then we might have DHH, LD, and I don't know, another exceptionality with it. So it's so many different categories. It can be done, but I think we did it last year for gifted, right? And did we do it for another? I can't remember. But yeah, it can be done through Eli and caseload. Denise was saying to me.
Jessica?
If staff is interested, if each individual cert goes through their IPs and creates spreadsheet that can be correlated through the board, then you can have the breakdown. But it is a lot of individual work.
Yeah, it is a lot of work. And I know, yeah, we have through yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for bringing this forward. Much appreciated. Okay, item number 8, which is the board committee updates from SEAC representatives. So you'll note that we did receive an email that was sent from Maria about board committees. So I wanted to provide a response for that. So there was several committees that were listed, and we have been able to get some updates from the staff members that are associated with those committees. So the first one was for the Home Parish Partnership and the Focus on Faith committees. Both of these committees have been on a hiatus since the pandemic shut down. There was a CPIC member on the homeschool parish committee, but not on the Focus on Faith, because there was a reference in the email about CPIC members being on, but not SEAC. So there was a member from CPIC that was on the homeschool parish committee, but not on the Focus on Faith committee. Having said that, those two committees are going to merge. So they're going to put together their agendas, and their sort of what they're working on are very similar. So they're going to be merging the homeschool parish and the Focus on Faith committees, and Superintendent Nar, who has that portfolio, said she would be more than happy to have SEAC representation. So when those committees, when that committee is finally back amalgamated and going out, we will get an invite to participate on that committee. The HCDSB strategic plan is the HCDSB multi-year strategic plan does not have any CPIC member. Each standing committee like CPIC or SEAC are being consulted like SEAC was this evening. The school year calendar, a SEAC member is more than welcome on the committee next year. So we'll ensure that an invite is sent out for anyone that might be interested in being on that particular committee. And the Regional Specialized Programming Committee, SEAC member Angela Santos volunteered for this committee. An email was sent to SEAC members on April 28th to let them know that Angela was on this committee. It's been added to tonight's agenda. Was there any questions at all on that before I move to the next piece? Okay, so now we're just going to move on to some of the committees that we're currently sitting on to see if we do have any updates. So the first one is the Bullying Prevention and Intervention Committee. Andrea?
I just have a brief update. At our last meeting, we did talk about the a reporting tool, because currently there isn't a bullying specific reporting tool. There is a hate and bias tool that was recently launched. So we're looking at how we can just use that same tool for bullying as well. So that is something they are looking into. We did discuss, we brought feedback about the plan. So there's the bullying prevention and intervention plan that we brought SEAC feedback as well as feedback from around the table. So we just took our time to update that plan. And that's really all we have in terms of an update.
Maybe there's another meeting upcoming the next.
There is one coming up
next week.
It's in June 6th.
Yeah.
Or so.
Okay, thanks, Andrea. Yeah. The second one is the streaming committee. Maria, is there any updates on that?
Yes, there actually is. We had a meeting May 11th. It was a very robust meeting, and so I'm going to try and hit some highlights. Jody was also there, so she can correct me if I'm wrong or add anything significant that I missed. Most of the conversation was focused on the grade 9 math, as that was the first course to be streamed and has the most sort of history. I think science has also been streamed. Other courses are not technically de-streamed, but they're only offered in academic, which is really a form of de-streaming as well. So it'd be good to see that committee expand to the other courses as well, I think. Again, I can't possibly just summarize all the great discussion or all the great work that's been done. I'll do some highlights. And I would invite fellow SEAC members to ask questions tonight or provide any feedback they would like brought forth. Those questions could probably be better answered by someone other than me, but I know one of the things Jody talked about was providing training directly to teachers who are in the classroom in addition to the training with spec ed staff, which I think is an excellent idea and something I would encourage more of even beyond the de-streaming. Because our classroom teachers really are dealing with so much and our certs really have a lot on their plates as well. And now with the de-streaming, especially our high school teachers, they were used to maybe a lesser range of abilities in their classrooms. Right now, they've got the full gamut in there, and that's quite a big change for them. There was some discussion about working with students in elementary to better prepare them for the de-streaming in grade 9, and I think that's really a great focus. I've attended a provincial webinar the day before where a teacher talked about students coming into grade 9 who had been on a modified curriculum, working at a grade 5 to 6 level, and that really spoke to me because when I first heard about de-streaming, I was really, struggling with the fact that these issues they're building for 10 years and we're, trying to address them in grade 9, right? So I think I was happy to see that our board was focused on the earlier years and I would definitely encourage that to continue. One thing I was kind of surprised, there were some stats shared, for example, that now with the streaming, only 5% of students were at risk of not receiving a credit. But what was not available was what the baseline was for that. So I was a little bit surprised. I would think that going into something like this, you would have decide what what criteria you're going to look at and have a baseline, because numbers are really not as relevant when you don't have something to compare them to. And it can also create opportunity for bias, right? Maybe you're going to want to look at the numbers that look good, as opposed to deciding up front, like what are you going to look at? I did ask in the meeting, there was a lot of general comments overall about how students were doing. So I did ask how our spec ed students in particular were doing, including those who might struggle, be below grade level, and those who were receiving enrichment. And that information wasn't really available. So I'm hoping that will be available in future meetings. And I hope the meetings are going to continue because this is really significant work that's happening. It's a significant impact on all our students and especially our spec ed students. As more courses get de-streamed, et cetera. I guess some boards there is the option to de-stream in grade 10, which some boards are doing, but not ours. But I'm sure it will come eventually. So I think it's really important work and I hope the committee will continue to meet regularly and I'm happy to be a part of it. And if anyone has any questions, I might not be able to answer them, but somebody else might.
Thanks, Maria. Was there any questions with respect to the de-streaming? Yep.
I just have a question. How often do they meet?
So after the meeting, I realized I'm not sure when the next one is. I don't know if I missed it or if it was shared. We haven't met like in over a year. So I don't think there's a consistent schedule that I'm aware of. I don't know if Jody might know different or the director, but yeah, I'm not too sure. Not often enough, in my opinion.
Jody, do you know, is it kind of as needed or is there sort of rhyme or reason behind the scheduling?
I'm not aware. I know that we met last year.
No worries.
This year.
Okay, that's fair. I mean, I know that some have regular sets, some are kind of like as needed as things come up. So, okay, thank you for that update. 8.3 is the regional specialized programming committee, but I think Angela has left. Yes. She was here, but I think she's left.
I was at that meeting.
Okay, do you want to give us an update?
Actually, yes, we met, when was it? It was last week. Just trying to look at the date. It was last week. I was double dipping in meetings all day, so I'm just trying to get my head around it. It was a really good group. There were probably about 20, 25 people on it and a real mix of admin, teachers, a couple of board staff or trustees. So basically they're looking at doing a central or specialized programming. There's a request for it from parents and students, and they're trying to see what it would take. Do we do arts? There's looking at arts. I'm so sorry. I have been talking all day too. Like I've been presenting in meetings. So I cannot talk anymore. My husband's gonna be so grateful, but sorry that I'm not coming out very eloquent today. Anyway, so we're looking at doing either sports or arts or potentially both. We don't know. It's exploratory. We're looking at what are the dilemmas, what are the challenges, what are the pros, what are the cons, and we went into breakout sessions. So it was really interesting. They're going to break out into subcommittees, I think, one focusing on regional arts and one focusing on sports. And yeah, I don't know when we're meeting either, but it does sound like they're trying to do more frequent. I think it will be within a couple weeks and then September. So that's my very ineloquent way of saying I was there.
Thank you. Well, thank you for pitch hitting. I can certainly always reach out to see if Angela had anything else that she wanted to share, and we can do that via email. But it sounds like you captured it. So thank you very much again for pitch hitting. I also just wanted to comment that the Journey with Jesus committee is done for this year, but it'll be added back next year. So that's another opportunity for participation. So moving ahead to item number 9, which is communications to SEAC, we will be starting with the superintendent's report. So Superintendent Rossini, you're up.
So I'd like to start by announcing that Cassandra Jack Caldera has been appointed Superintendent of Special Education Services effective August 1st, 2023. Cassandra has more than 21 years of professional experience in Catholic education, and she comes to us from Dufferin Peel. Cassandra has served on a number of system level and provincial committees, including the initial Teacher Education Committee for the Institute for Catholic Education. She's currently the chair of the Catholic Principals Council of Ontario Equity, Diversity, Inclusivity Standing Committee. Cassandra brings a wealth of experience and expertise to Halton Catholic. Under student supports, programs, and celebrations, and it's coming up to be that time of year. And I know you were all sent an invitation to the many events that are coming up, and we hope to see you represented there. So we've had open houses for our essential skills classes, structured teaching classes, and community living classes at the end of April and May. And the Oakville and Burlington virtual gifted open houses were held on May 2nd and May 4th. The Project Search 23-24 interns have been selected. 6 interns have accepted their offer of admission, and IPRCs will be held the beginning of May. Oh, this week, May 29th. Communication went out from our department to all staff about National Accessibility Week and Red Shirt Day. National Accessibility Week will take place from May 28th to June 3rd, and Red T-shirt Day is May 31st. This annual event celebrates the valuable contributions and leadership of Canadians with disabilities and highlights the ongoing work being done to create a more accessible and inclusive society. And I thank all the members of SEAC who wore red or represented something with red on it. With respect to professional development and new initiatives and processes, and as you know, as a superintendent, gets reported monthly at SEAC what our professional development has been for the past month. The elementary CERT meeting was held on April 25th. Topics included a fetal alcohol syndrome awareness presentation, sharing of the new MID infographic, and a de-streamed presentation from our curriculum partners. The secondary department head meeting was held on May 16th. Topics included a student census presentation, guidance information sheet, and sharing of information items. An A4 CLC for structured teaching class and life skills special education teachers was held May 9th. Topics included the Equals Math program, supporting post-secondary transitions, and presentations from Halton Support Services, Developmental Services Ontario, and our Halton Community Living organizations. A number of our consultants, the coordinator, and myself attended the Ontario Council of Administrators in Special Education Symposium on May 18th. And the topics included an update from the ministry, a legal corner, best practices for transition for students in special education, and a college university panel for students with special education needs. Jody O'Reilly participated in a feedback meeting with the ministry on removing barriers for students with disabilities funding. And the math intervention leads have hosted 2 of 3 sessions being offered to administrators on the new math intervention resource, Do the Math. With mental health and well-being, we'll be providing summer mental health supports this summer, supported by social workers and child and youth counselors. Referrals will come from existing social work and child and youth counselor caseloads, as well as summer school. We're still waiting for the money to be received. We do have the postings ready to go for people who would be interested, CYCs and social workers, but we have not yet staffed it up. Notes for you. Oh, it's just for me? Oh, thanks. How long has this day been? I'm sorry. I apologize for that. Anyway, that's it for now. Thank you.
I also just wanted to say that we had the opportunity to attend, some of the people that are here attended the life skills prom. Everybody needs to go. It is a wonderful, wonderful event. Notre Dame did an excellent job hosting it, and Norm did such a great speech at the beginning. But just the feeling. You walked in and there was this incredible feeling of just joy and like fun, and the best buddies do such an excellent job. They were all dressed up. They were right in the action. There was a wonderful dinner. There was a Sunday bar. There was dancing. There was a photo booth. There was just, you couldn't help but feel so great being there. It definitely was soul filling, and I would encourage anybody to participate, to attend one of those events. It really was indescribable. And, you know, just the joy on the students' faces, and even more so than that, the parents that were there. And I was talking to one parent, and, you know, and she said, oh, it's so great that the students can see each other from other programs. And I said, well, isn't it also great the parents can see each other from other programs? Because the parents had chances to connect as well. And just a wonderful event. So yeah, of course.
Just to follow up on that, it's when Norm said Jesus is in our midst. I mean, I teared up. So it was just beautiful.
Yeah, Jessica.
Before my question, I wish this prom one day would be in the evening so I can attend.
It was. It was in the evening. Yeah, it started at 6 o'clock.
I thought I had to take day off work. Okay, next year for sure. Thank you.
Usually the Christmas one is during the day.
Okay.
But the life skills prom is in the evening. Sorry, go ahead.
Good to know. This question may be more for Jody or even someone else. ABC didn't realize that the gifted open houses already happened, because we usually get invited. So I don't know what happened this year. For next year, who should I contact? I know you will no longer be able to help us. Is it still Claudia? Is it Jody? Who? Thank you.
Maria?
Sorry, in addition to that, I just wanted to know, was ABC information at least shared in the open houses? Because usually that's part of the presentation. We're usually there, but they usually do give our contact information and such. Do you know if that happened this year?
I can follow up and find out, but I do know that they've followed the same presentations in the past years. Usually that's how they do it. So I can follow up and find out. I'm sure it was, yeah.
Thanks, Jody. Okay, so just moving on to the trustee report. Trustee Powell, if you don't mind.
I don't mind. Do you mind? Let's see if I can get through this. Okay. So just a few updates from us. Actually, Superintendent Rossini covered a few of them, so I can scratch those off. But a couple motions were put forth at our last board meeting in May. One was to recognize June 13th as International Albinism Awareness Day by Trustee Kelly, and that motion passed. That's June 13th. Another one was Vice Chair Agnew put a notice of motion in April, but it came up as an action report for discussion. Right? It came up in April?
Yeah, I was sick, so it came back to the meeting, the subsequent meeting.
Yeah, because anyway, It came up at the May 16th board meeting. There was a rather fulsome discussion and debate on the reasoning behind it. Sorry, this is the action report that we talked about at our SEAC meeting. And this was the board response to committee recommendations. Okay, so to put in place some sort of procedure or a process, not a procedure, sorry, but there currently is no policy or process. Policy or procedure in place. And we're looking at how do we get that. So that, yeah, it was a rather fulsome discussion and a debate on the reasoning behind it, whether there's a need for it. So the motion passed, just squeaked through, but it will be going to the policy committee in June for review and discussion, or for discussion and review. Anyway. At the May 16th board meeting, there was an excellent presentation by Superintendent Del Sordo on SHISM, which is Specialist High Skills Major. Yes. It's a ministry approved program that allows students to focus on a certain, whether it's horticulture or construction, and to kind of gear their high school courses towards it. And they graduate with this SHISM degree, or not degree, diploma, sorry. Anyway, that was at the May 16th board meeting. That was, like I said, I would encourage you to go back. There's a lot of information in there. And we're doing some really good things. There's 40 SHISM programs offered in this school year in our board. OYAP, which is the Ontario Youth Apprentice Program. Students can explore different trades while still in high school. This year, there was a 44% increase in participants from previous years. And I thought that was really neat. And we're introducing 3 new OYAP programs. And this allows the students, high school students, to actually take these courses and get apprenticeship hours while still in high school. So that's kind of cool. There's 3 new ones coming in September. Chef slash baker, construction, and a skills trade concentrated way up. I'm not sure what that means, sorry. Couple other things we had, experiential learning this last few months. We did transit training for life skills students. We introduced and supported, it's called Let's Go Fit for our life skills classes. There was some additional outdoor education funding for spec ed classes. I have to look into that further. I have a note for you or to look up. Sorry that I did do that. Anyway, disregard my thing. National accessibility we talked about. Redshirt Day. Actually, this is neat, you guys. The Student Senate, they have a spec ed subcommittee, and they have voted to promote Redshirt Day on all their social media channels. So if you're tweeting or anything, tag the student. I think it's they have their own Twitter. Again, I have look up, sorry. They do, don't they? Okay. So tag Easter Seals Ontario, HCGSB SEAC, and the Student Senate. And they're really trying to promote it. We have the Deaf and Hard of Hearing picnic coming up. That's June 14th. Did that already get mentioned today? Okay, just making sure. Wednesday, June 14th, 10 till 2. And that's for grades 1 to 12, who are part of our Deaf and Hard of Hearing community. And lastly, the Law Enforcement Torch Run for Special Olympics is Thursday, June 8th at the Milton Community Park. That's all I got.
Thank you, Trustee Powell. Is there any questions on the trustee report, Maria?
Yeah, just clarification. I think you mentioned the World Albinism Day motion had been approved. I thought that was just a notice of motion coming.
Sorry, it is a notice of motion. I'm sorry.
So it hasn't been voted on yet?
The motion, no. The notice of motion was put forth to recognize it, and yes.
Yeah, because notice of motions are not approved, I don't think, are they?
I think it was just an error in statements, but no, they're not.
It's confusing, yeah, okay.
So it'll be coming to the next board meeting. So I think it's just late and we're probably getting a little bit tired. So a notice of motion was on the table at the last meeting, and it'll be coming to the next board meeting for a vote. Trustee Powell, is there other questions?
I just wanted to share that the subcommittee has a Instagram account. It's not Twitter. Yeah, it's Instagram account. I know because we added them to our memo for this week and said that they would be promoting it in their schools and to follow them, and I'd have to look it up. But it
Yeah,
is
if
an
you wouldn't
Instagram
mind,
account.
Jody, and then sending that an email, that would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Okay, and 9.3, thank you for your patience. We have an association report from the Holton Down Syndrome Association. So Mandy, over to you.
Good evening, everybody. Andrea, do you mind sliding down for me to slide 22, please, to the poster? And it's more exciting, and I'll speak to the rest. Thank you very much. All right, yeah, so Halton Down Syndrome Association is just really excited to announce that our walk is coming up on June 10th. It's been a long 6-7 months of preparation by the committee, but everybody's really excited. It's live, it's in person, so our theme this year is Together Again, and everybody's really pumped about it. It's going to be in the Milton Fairgrounds. We've had in the past over 1,000 people attend pre-COVID. It's a huge unknown walk, but it's one of the largest in Canada for Down syndrome. And in our peak year, we had raised over $120,000. And all of those funds are carefully managed by a board and go right back to our community in programs, advocacy, awareness workshops, parent workshops, teacher interactions, all kinds of really hands-on grassroots activities that benefit our VIPs, our children with Down syndrome. So we're very excited. It's very much a carnival. The walk part is not super long. We walk through Milton and we go through the farmers market and then we kind of end up back at the fairgrounds. But then we have a barbecue. We've got bouncy castles. The kids have lots of fun. We've got Halton Vulnerable Persons police sector coming. So they're coming to speak to our kids about a couple of programs that really support people who are more vulnerable in our community. Sometimes our kids with Down syndrome can be wanderers and, can have some scares. So there's different programs that are in place for that. They'll be there. And the mayor's coming out, possibly MP Adam Van Couverden or some representatives from his section there. And we're just really excited. It's going to be a lot of fun and we're looking forward to just seeing each other again. A lot of us our kids have grown up, 3 years and we haven't been able to get together. So we're very excited. If you're around in Milton that day, come by, say hi. And otherwise I'll bring some photos and send you a recap after. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mandy. I wish you lots of success with that and hopefully you've got a great turnout. But it sounds like an amazing event. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Is there any questions at all for Mandy on the association report? No? Okay. So thank you again. So moving on to item number 10, which is SEAC discussion. So just before I ask if there's anything we'd like to discuss, I just wanted to make a note. You probably would have seen the email that Dr. Lawson's presentation has been moved to June 15th at 6:30 p.m. We did that because there was just so much going on this week. There was conflicts and we really wanted to give as much of an opportunity for participants across our system to be able to participate and not be too worried about trying to figure out which event they could attend. So thankfully, Dr. Lawson was completely okay with. Yeah.
Would the recording be available? Because I no longer can attend.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that's okay. It's a virtual presentation. It will be recorded. The invitation has been sent to all SEAC members and all parents and guardians from the board were email, and this also has been tweeted out. It will continue to be promoted. And we hope to have a good turnout, but that's the nice thing about virtuals. We are able to record and then reshare later. And again, I just, I said before, she's been an absolute pleasure to work with. So I expect it'll be a fantastic presentation. Okay, so for SEAC discussion, is there anything that we would like to discuss? Maria?
Yeah, so I don't want to get into a long discussion. It's been a very long meeting and I'm sure everyone would like to get home. I just would like to ask members to have a look at the code of conduct section with regards to guiding principles to build credibility, mutual respect, and a spirit of collaboration, which starts off as SEAC is most effective when all members feel an equal opportunity to contribute and when all members' opinions are equally valued and respected. And then some of the principles include abstaining from questioning or ascribing motives to other members, recognizing other members' concerns brought forward, refraining from criticizing or putting down members for having a difference of opinion or challenging the status quo, and debates about issues are healthy, but debates about people are not. So just some thoughts to reflect upon.
Thanks, Maria. Okay, moving on to item number 11, which is meeting summary and next steps. So our next meeting agenda is for May the 29th. This June agenda will, June 29th. Oh my God. June, our meeting in June. The June agenda will include a SEA presentation, after school skills development program presentation, psychological assessment wait time update in the superintendent report, and a year-end video. It's always a fantastic meeting. So really looking forward to that. Okay, and then we're moving on to item number 13, which is resolution for absentees. So be it resolved that Abiola, Rick, Ali, and Tracy, and Tiana be excused. Could I get a mover for that? Okay, thanks, Rhonda. So moved by Rhonda and seconded.
I'll second it.
Thanks, Amanda. Okay, which leads us to number 14, which is adjournment and closing prayer. So can I get a motion to adjourn? Jessica, thank you.
Sure,
Seconded.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Trustee Powell. Okay, and we're moving to our closing prayer. So if you'll all join me in the sound of our faith, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Blessed are you, O God of all creation. Each day you spread before us the rich and wonderful diversity of the human family, created in the divine splendor of your love. Fashioned in your image, you call us to love one another with the same tender care with which you brought us to creation. Each one of us is but one small part of the glory that is you. As we serve the students and families of the Halton Catholic District School Board on the Special Education Advisory Committee, fill us with your grace, guide us with your wisdom, and give us the strength and courage to do your work, so that it may always be said of our every act, God saw that it was good. Son and Holy Spirit, amen. Thank you, everybody, for a very fulsome meeting tonight. A lot of participation. I think we got a lot of great things done. So thank you and have a wonderful evening. Before we go. Yay. Everybody with your red shirts.